Hoyt, men er ikke veldig flink om å forklare mitt selv.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this semester's final archaeological research seminar. Today we are fortunate enough to be visited by Theo, also known as Theo Bell. He is a field archaeologist at the Museum of Archaeology in Stavanger, where he also works as a project manager. And he has also been teaching GIS classes here in Bergen for, I think, 2 years now, close to 2 years. So without further ado, Theo, let's hear about Eikebakken in Jæren. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Today we're gonna talk about a burial ground that we excavated like in 2016. Like the report took much longer time than it was meant to be. Primarily because we produce way too much information, sort of thing. We documented a lot, and we had to work under extreme time pressure. Let's see if I can put this on. Yeah. Well, first, where are we? We are in the northern part of Frøylandsvannet, in the middle of Jæren, in Klepp municipality. Eikebakken is northeast from the Anda 2 ridge, which is a well-known cultural landscape dating back to Stone Age, but like primarily like large monuments from Bronze Age, and you also have like large monuments from the second part of the early Iron Age and well into Viking Age. The period we are going to talk about is younger Bronze Age and pre-Roman Iron Age, so in a way it fits a bit like the gap that we are lacking from the Anda and 2 ridge, and also like highlights the importance of this area, like also through these periods that haven't been like represented through archaeology before.
I will probably looking. You have to stay on the side now.
I will stay on the side. Okay, yeah, sorry, I just get myself in the middle. Yeah, this map shows like how many of the synlig kulturminner, or like cultural remains that had been registered above the surface, have disappeared already in this area. Like we are in one of the most central districts, farming districts in Norway, like one of the most productive farming districts in Norway. And obviously like the old cultural landscape is slowly disappearing, especially like after the 1950s through the 60s. And beginning of the 70s was the major loss of this kind of cultural landscape. Eikebakken is here in the farm Øvre Øksnevad. You can see that most of the cultural remains that once were visible on the area are already gone, which is the red dots that we have there. They are far away. If we count the amount of clearance cairns within like the Askeladden database, we can see like that the areas with large clearance cairns are being confined slowly towards the east, towards areas that are more in the periphery, sort of thing. There are areas where you have like beitemark, where you have like grazing land, sort of thing, while like the rest of the area. Oh, sorry.
I think you can stay on the other side.
So sorry, maybe it's much better. See, there. While the most central areas, like you can see like that we don't have like this kind of cultural landscape anymore. Here I've got like some notes because I wanted to talk a bit about Yeah, interpreting cairns in Rogaland it's a challenge. That's what I try to show through like the two images that we have like on my left-hand side now, or the right-hand side for you. As you can see, like 3 different localities basically like have them register in a different way. You have them like register either like as clearance cairns, or as cairns, or as Grafrois. That means that within like the database we've got like limited, and in a way it's showing like the difficulty about like defining these structures on surface sort of thing. We don't really know what it is, not based on common visual like methods such as location or shape sort of thing. Like every archaeologist will have a different meaning about what they mean sort of thing. A core issue lies in the diagnostic ambiguity of many cairns. This ambiguity affects both research and heritage management. Many cairns lack clear internal structures, grave goods, or datable materials. And the same landscape can contain both types, often altered by later agricultural activity. Well, this is the excavation site right here. You can see like that it's an area that has already been like pressured by industrial development, and actually like we don't see, but before the industrial development it was intensive like sand and gravel quarrying before the area got completely flattened sort of thing. Most of the sites within this area over here are already gone actually. The site, upon our start, still kept like the promontory intact, and we could still see like how the visuality of the site and how prominent the site once was. But it was very difficult to figure it out where you are, because you are in a completely transformed landscape. The excavation of cairns at Eikebakken presented significant methodological and interpretative difficulties. A central issue was the lack of meaningful burial-related finds and distinct internal structures. Many cairns were devoid of clearly identifiable features, like defined burial context or architectonical elements. As a result, the archaeologists involved in the project struggled to define clear stratigraphical transitions. You cannot dig a cairn the same way you dig a mound. A mound, you can create a matrix, you can define layers. It's easy to interpret it. Once you open a cairn and you start removing stones, you reach a moment where you don't know where you are. It is very, very difficult. And this excavation showed it. The identification of subtle structural elements, such as slightly circular or lineal stone arrangement, was highly dependent on the interpretative skills of the excavating archaeologist. While some structures were evident, as you can see the 2 rows of stones that appear, different sizes, it's clear to the eye. Others were ambiguous and easily confounded with naturally occurring patterns. This is where psychological factors such as confirmation bias and the tendency to perceive patterns in random arrangements could influence interpretations, leading to the creation of features. For instance, what we can see right here is the archaeologist involved in the excavation. It's creating a circle of stone that actually, yeah, you do see a circular patterning around here, which is defined by this structure, but not a circle of stones per se, sort of thing. And this happened recurrently during the excavation of these features. Especially when stones used in supposed arrangements closely resemble the surrounding matrix, distinguishing between intentional and incidental placement became extremely difficult. Beyond interpretation, actual sampling for dating purposes proved to be also problematic. Most notably, many cairns lacked clear charcoal concentrations or definable base layer. You can really see it, for instance, in this one over here. It's difficult to see where the underground begins and where is the difference between the cairn and the underground. This made it difficult to determine where the cairn structure ended, which was in some cases a matter of subjective interpretation. This has direct implications for dating. Radiocarbon dating typically performed on macrofossils typically is performed on macrofossils extracted from soil samples within cairn profiles, which face limitations. Soil accumulation within cairns does not follow a uniform rate, and the relationship between the sample's depth and its date is normally misleading. Secondly, the large volume of each macrofossil sample, typically 2 and 2.5 liters, reduces vertical resolution. Macrofossils within a single sample may originate from different microstrata, making it impossible to assign dates for construction phases. What we did here was we moved towards trying to catch specific charcoal samples from underneath some stones, and it was one of our more experienced archaeologists doing this. That was Rolf. It was using its time and take all the samples from all the profiles, just the same archaeologists all the time, trying to have like a level of consistency and be able to date these structures. Given these complications, the project was eventually forced to abandon its original plan of single context excavation for a smaller selection of cairns. We tried to go broader. Not only was this method, the single context excavation method was inefficient in this particular case, it also failed to deliver reliable data. Due to the complex characteristics of the site itself, the farming sequences and settlement remains could not be separated from the cairns. We had to take either everything or nothing. The challenges include not only the practical limitations of stratigraphical excavation in stone-built features, but also the cognitive and methodological risks of misinterpreting ambiguous patterns. The site itself. From an archaeological perspective, the terracing distribution is the very first thing that catches the eye. It creates a classic tiered or layered cemetery layout in which the larger monuments dominate the skyline while smaller cairns and stone settings step down the slope. About 100 cairns are spread across the hill. They vary markedly in size, and the hierarchy is highly structured. On the uppermost terrace, which is this one here, you can see the terrace up there, 2 large cairns, cairn 1 and 2, dominate the site. Each measures almost 20 meters in diameter and covers more than 300 square meters, making them a focal monuments that are visible from far away. We move to the right here. Size analysis shows 5 distinctive groups. The 2 great cairns in group 1, they get out of the table, they are up here, more or less, stand apart. Group 2 consists of 3 large monuments about half their size, while Group 3 includes a dozen medium cairns. Groups 4 and 5 accounts for nearly 80% of the field. If you can see, the smaller cairns tend to cluster, while cairns in different groups tend to have like the same distance among each other, sort of thing. So the distribution is very hierarchical. It almost gives you the feeling that everything is done at once. In plan view, the majority of the monuments are circular or subcircular, but a few are subrectangular or irregular, hinting at chronological or functional diversity. The excavation work produced lots of documentation. This was the primary problem for the after-work phase. The archaeological features were investigating through a combination of sectioning, stratigraphical excavation, and contextual recording. We managed to achieve a representative amount of data from the cairns, and also crucial data regarding settlement and farming sequences that not only predate the grey field, but as we will see later on, it's also within the grey field. Each archaeological deposit or feature was treated as a context, a single stratigraphic unit tied to a specific formation event. So every layer on different structures has been assigned to one of these major contexts that we have here. And this structurizes the report and gives us a better understanding about how things relate to each other. To handle the large volume and variety of context, the project relies in 10 broader contextual groups, which allow for meaningful classification across the site. So for instance, context group D, which is the farming sequences, relies on, for instance, this flat map that we have created by superimposing the LIDAR data and the photogrammetrical data that we took from the entire site, because photogrammetry is not only taking a nice photo, it's also the model you're creating. So you can subtract the photogrammetry from the LIDAR data above, and you basically get like an image about the soil you have removed. Since you know from the notes that like the farming layers are recognizable under 40 centimeters, you can start marking where the farming layers most likely were, which fits very well with the notes that we were taking in the field. And you get like an understanding about which areas had been farmed and which cairns overlap the farming layers through the profile that you have on each, from each one of them, or the notes through the excavation. That gives you an understanding, for instance, of where to put the profiles and how the profiles for environmental sampling relate to the overall matrix of the site. It also proved to be crucial in order to define which ones were clearance cairns. I mean, you could see very well like situations like Punktbrink, where like the soil has accumulated above the cairn, and that combined with lack of construction elements, lack of finds, different elements, like helped us define like, okay, most likely the ones down here on the slope and that stone elongated structure and that area overlapped by those cairns are most likely clearance cairns. On surface, it was a bit difficult, sort of thing. And you end up at the end like not knowing what's what. Having a bit of focus on the farming evidence also gives you the possibility of trying to take environmental samples and trying to grab the entire longue durée of the site, sort of thing. We invested quite a lot of our resources in the pollen analysis of this farming sequences. Settlement-related features, which is F2 and F3, depending whether it's overlapped by a cairn or it's within an area not overlapped by a cairn, or how does it relate to the farming profile, helps you to tie up C14 datings and sandwich certain events and certain areas, so you can get like a better understanding of the site. It also gives you the possibility of, finding out houses, post-built structures, the typical from a flat-top decking. You can see that we managed to find up to 6 houses, clearly, sort of thing. They were not prioritized on the project, so we had to cut them like towards the last 10 days of the project. We tried to spade them and take the samples we needed, sort of thing. With one of them, I really regret having done it. I wish I had done it more careful. We will see later on. The other ones are, yeah, like Bronze Age and pre-Roman Iron Age settlement house. The cairn evidence, the difference between like the thickness of the stone coverage above, sort of thing, when you only have like 2 layers of stones or really flat, it gives you the possibility of defining them maybe like as stone setting, even though like, I mean, like this is a bit difficult when you're dealing with material from Rogaland, because it depends also of the size of the stones that are involved in the cairn itself. But we have tried to organize the structures about like which ones are most likely stone settings, which ones are low cairns, and which ones are like a bit like thicker, larger cairns. Context group F1 is a highly interpretative group that includes fine concentrations, includes indications of construction within the cairns, pits within the cairns, and also like curb stones or other elements that may be like definable about like this structure is constructed with a different purpose and than clearing or cows, sort of thing. You can see like how diffuse many of the features could be. So for instance, this is a series of photography of the excavation of one of the stone settings that we have seen above. I mean, like you have like one layer of a stone, a lower layer of stones, remains of a curb, which is already highlighting you that you do have like the presence of context F1 within it. But as you remove like the layer of the stones, this photo and that one is more or less the same area, then you find like a turf layer. Underneath the turf layer, you find another stone packing. Within the stone packing, you have a circular stone that could be like, could have like a symbolic meaning. We don't know. We didn't pick up these stones as finds because every stone is round in this site. And then towards the end, we found a small package of organic material down below. Sadly, like once we did the flotation of the material, it didn't show any charcoal that we could date, sort of thing. But it gives you the feeling that, I mean, like you are in front of something that you haven't fully understood. This cairn had no finds. So this is the kind of data you're working with. But many other cairns had finds. For instance, each row is one museum number assigned for one cairn, and it specifies the different categories or under numbers that the cataloging of the finds had been organized. Once you put them like this, you see certain patterns. For instance, you do have burnt bone on 5 cairns. The one that had more burnt bone was 62 grams. The remaining we are talking about like 1 gram, 2 grams of bone, like really fragmented, really small, almost, well, completely you cannot identify it. You do have like Jæren fragments that you could not recognize. Actually, like I don't even know like whether in some of these ones the iron fragments are modern, sort of thing. We had like big pits in the bigger ones, for instance, and a lot of soppel, basically. But we do have like what we believe it's a Svanehals fibula, which is basically like a nail that it's turned a bit like to the side. Like it's normally like from the end of Bronze Age, beginning of pre-Roman Iron Age. It fits very well with the site itself, sort of thing. We do have like 2 perler. At Bronze card, it's nothing, actually. Ceramic. We've got the one with more ceramic had like up to 2 kilos. Normally, like within 300 grams, 400 grams of ceramic, heavily fragmented. We do have broken kvernstein, skogekverner, saddle mills. And also in relationship with saddle mills, we do have like malestein, slippestein, glattestein. That depends a bit like who had cataloged that sort of thing. But it's like they are like basically like the round stone that you use on top of the saddle mill sort of thing. So, and then we do have other kind of elements like shell fragments, ochre a bit in Mound 1, quartz, not much, a bit of birch bark, usually burnt, and slag. Slag, only one mound had a bit more slag, the rest had like small slag klumper sort of thing. This is typical for graves from Younger Bronze Age, pre-Roman Iron Age, but it goes all the way to Roman times sort of thing. It's very difficult to define this, but you can see that there is no cairn around here that shows a clear other period going on. And then depending on the frequency of the finds and the amount of the finds and other kind of interpretations, we have defined them either as a grave find or something else, we don't know, sort of thing, or like they are finds from settlement area. Bone. We have in this very little. The one that has more bone is here. Here we do have like a bone layer, clear grave. That's the photo we have here. Shell. We were not really sure whether this shell was actually not brought by birds, sort of thing. It was something weird. We picked it up. We have dated one of them. It gave us like quite early dating, Äldre bronzealder. It's one of the earliest datings related to the grave field. It could be that the shell has been picked up from the shore and it was already 400 years old when it was picked up. We don't know, sort of thing, but it's something that at least shows that it's not by chance, sort of thing. Ceramic. We measure every find, sort of thing, and this is the ceramic that was picked up, like represented by amount of grams. So you can really see clear concentrations that could indicate like urnegraver, especially when they are associated to small bone fragments, sort of thing. Everything is heavily fragmented, and you do see like spreadings of almost like that. The ceramic, it could come like from the farming layer or from the farming activity around, sort of thing. You don't really know. We picked it up anyway, and we measure it. This is how like the larger concentrations of ceramics look like. Heavily fragmented, completely crushed. Another thing that was fragmented and crushed was the millstones. You can see on the red lines, which are a bit thin, sort of thing, where we have identified like that it's broken. It's very difficult to break a millstone. I mean, you really have to do it on purpose. It's not like it's not something that it's because of throwing it away, as it could happen with ceramics, sort of thing. This is showing like a ritual purpose. When we put together the elements that we have observed in the field documentation, like for instance the presence of possible or clear curbstones, possible or clear inner structures, whether they are like a packed stone layer down below, that it's clearly a packed stone layer, or a grop like the photo you saw, or things like that, and clear concentrations of finds that fill up, that fit within like those categories that you have seen like before, the complexity of the site emerges. And that's how we have tried to explain what at the beginning looked a bit difficult to explain, sort of thing, because every cairn looked like completely different from each other. That gave us the possibility of categorizing the cairns, even though like I would try to be a bit careful on categorizing this kind of structure, sort of thing, but you feel like that you are not doing your work if you are incapable of defining this as a grave or something else. But like, to tell you the truth, I can't put my hand in the fire that all of these are graves. I have the feeling that they are because I've been working a lot in Rogaland, and normally we don't find bone at all. We also have like indications of fragmentation that could have extended into the bone material. I mean, like for all I know, like maybe the millstones have been used to turning like the bone into powder. And also like the kind of features that we're dealing with, which are stones piled on top of each other, does not provide a good preservation. To think. Beside of that, like we are also dealing with a period that it's characterized by this diffuse graves. So we've got like a group here where I could say that with more certainty that they are graves, or I believe they are graves, or we believe that they are graves. These ones, they look more complex. These are the two assumed graves. They are the big monuments. You have to consider that Mound 1, Mound 2, which is the largest one, and the one that it's more prominent, does not have any bone or any materials. The only thing we found like 2 briner within this mound. On this mound here, we did found a lot of bone on the very bottom. And we managed to date that bone also. This is how the other structures look. You can see like a tremendous variation, and the ones I'm not sure whether they are graves or not. Sorry, these ones. To think, I mean, I could argue this for being a grave and this, but I don't have the materials to give me that information for sure. When it comes to other structures, we have categorized them as Anleg Medfund eller Utenfund. They are not Ridningsreuser, they are something else. Some of them have finds, some of them don't have finds. Normally they are the ones that have less finds, but like they show a structural elements within them. They are normally like what we have defined in surface as stone settings. They look like this. You can really see like a certain tendency of having round stones, even though some of them, I'm not really sure. For instance, that one there, or, yeah. That one there is a bit weird, but it looks like. We also have a really big fence going on here, so we had like the suspicion that like many of the larger stones had been picked up for the fence, sort of thing, and I will show you later on like an example of one row that it's clearly being robbed, sort of thing. So bringing it together a bit. Normally when we took the pauses after the heavy work, like we did yoga, like before lunch, sort of thing. So we all gathered together on top of the mount, as maybe humans have done like for 4,000 years ago, sort of thing, or 3,000 years ago. And we stretched it a bit before we could eat, sort of thing.
To get closer to the gods.
Yeah, maybe. So I decided to take this photo one, or I don't know who took that one. When it comes to the C14 samples and the definition in context groups, it allows us to see what's fitting and what's not fitting and why, sort of thing. We can see, like, for instance, we've got samples taken from the charcoal layer, which is the upswing slag, which is indicating like that, okay, there is vegetation burning, these black ones, from late Neolithic to early Bronze Age. It fits very well with the pollen data. So we have like some datings that fall within this range that are coming from the bottom of cairn fields. Maybe we had picked up charcoal that was from this charcoal-rich layer that was there. It's the same, like both contexts appear right on top of the underground, so it could be. Then we have like a major amount of datings falling between the Hallstatt Plateau, which will be about 800 BC to 500, 400 BC, sort of thing, and extending into pre-Roman Iron Age. Some of the datings are related to the farming profiles. Some of the datings are related to soil samples taken either from the upper part of the Roisfield or the lower part of the Roisfield. Normally, like the samples from the upper part of the Roisfield fall within like this range, and they are all of them like related to heather burning, sort of thing. Is heather what we are dating here? So we wanted to know when does this start, hoping that it will get somewhere, that it will tell us more or less that the site is out of use. But it seems that most of them are falling on a period posterior to the Black Death and continues all the time, which is also interesting information, but actually not the information we wanted to achieve in relationship to the Greyfield, which was what we were expecting. What we can see is that many of the settlement remains samples and the Greyfield related samples appear together. So it means that the Greyfield most likely is developing as the settlement and the farming is going on, and then later on something else happens. We also took samples from charred material from the ceramic. We found matskorpe, charred material, and we decided to date that sort of thing. In a way, we wanted to get like more secure datings, but we also wanted to be sure how reliable the soil, that the samples we have picked up from the soil layers are. We don't have ceramic on every cairn. We do have a lot of samples in the archive now. We want to know how representative those samples are. So you are trying to get like a certain control through different things that you are able to sample, sort of thing. You have to consider that I'm not trying to date a Greyfield and finish. I need to create a report that highlights the potential for research of the material that it's ending up in the museum. So there is certain things that you can do in order to ensure that those samples are good. Like for instance, now I can give, if somebody comes and says that I want to invest money in 20 samples from this Greyfield, I can give you an educated guess about which samples I will suggest you to date. Or they can do it themselves through the report. Yeah. What we can see also from the samples is that, like for instance, the samples related to the Greyfield that are secure fall within these ones. If we look away from the shell that I previously mentioned, again, the shell could have been picked up in the shore, sort of thing, but I don't know, sort of thing, but it appears like as a clear outlier. And also, we can see that the settlement that we have dated, Posos, the houses, divides itself in two different periods. Well, it's a period that fits with the cairns, and a period that is quite late, sort of thing. So, reconstruction of the landscape. When we come to the site, especially in the middle of Jæren, you do really need to reconstruct the landscape as it was. You cannot assume that that area, that it's a cultivated field now, it's not a swamp, was not a swamp 100 years ago. The changes in Jæren had been dramatic. I mean, like lakes have disappeared, and not smaller ones, quite large ones. This is a map from 1953 that has a pretty good mapping of the swamp area. So we can see that the hilltop where the site is lies in an area between the Innmark of Engelsvoll farm, which is a cultivated area with a lot of, well, it used to have a lot of cultural remains, but they are now gone, and a swampy area. So we are already in a quite liminal area. Another thing that represents the swamp is Thor Eliassen's card that also represents the cultural Kulturminner in 1907, sort of thing. We have like the lack of having Tor Eliassen's mapping of Jæren to work with. Aerial photo from 1937 shows the geology much better. And here we can get an understanding about like the dramatic changes that have happened by quarrying the esker ridges that once were here. An esker is a linear feature, normally like quite high up above the sea ground, and normally used as means of communication. Half of Ireland is crossed side to side by a large esker. And it has been like, I think, like a Roman road on top of it. We do believe like that the position of the two mounds on top of the esker, which is the last remnants of the esker itself, has something to do with the meaning of the site. This esker would have allowed to move through the swampy area, and it would have had like quite a traffic. We can also see how many of the cultural remains that were once registered are gone. So we can imagine that, for instance, the later Iron Age settlement area with the kind of Gartsanlegger that we would have expected would have been around this area here, sort of thing. This site was dug in 1996. There were graves from the same period as this site. It was actually Morten's, one of the first excavations he was on. It was on that site. The paleobotanists that have worked with the samples, Don and Daniel, had already published their material in Environmental Science. It's a really interesting article, sort of thing, like they managed to infer the long periods through the botanical data. This data shows interesting material, sort of thing. I'm gonna try to see on the notes where I do have this. The analysis of pollen and macrofossil material reveals three distinct main phases, providing a broader understanding of the local landscape and its development. The phases correspond well with the overall interpretation of the site, which shows a gradual transition from an agricultural landscape to a burial ground. The first phase, characterized by woodland, as you can see on their map, lacks direct archaeological evidence. However, the earliest pollen data from the site indicates that around 2100 before Christian era, the landscape was primarily covered by deciduous forest, dominated by birch and hazel. Although the area was largely forested, pollen results suggest the existence of small clearings, indicating limited human activity in the landscape at that time, before late Neolithic. The earliest cultivation layers are dated to around 2100 to 1900, which would be this dating around here. Although it lacked cereal pollen. Evidence such as wheat pollen, homogeneous stone-clear soil, and charcoal content indicates typical characteristics of prehistoric farmland in the region. The low presence of cereal pollen aligns with regional trends during the early small-scale farming. So early small-scale farming at the site, we have it already towards the end of late Neolithic. No settlement structures from this period have been identified, but nearby habitation is assumed, likely close to the water. We would expect to find the two-ailed houses and the Neolithic houses close here, as we do in Frøyland or we do in Lonaheia, for instance. That's what I would expect. Based on comparable settlement patterns, such as at Frøyland, for instance, which is here, where we do have a two-ailed house. This initial phase of land clearance and cultivation at Øvre Øksnevad coincides with broader regional transitions and is contemporaneous with nearby settlements like Lonaheia in Øvre Øksnevad. There we got this early, yeah, that's perfect, this early settlement sort of thing in the farming, intensive farming. During this period and towards the late Bronze Age, during the late Bronze Age and into the early pre-Roman Iron Age, agriculture at the site intensified, as shown by thicker cultivation layers date to this period. A clear shift in the pollen profiles from lower layers rich in cereal, wheat, and ruderal plant taxa to upper layers dominated by heath vegetation suggest a gradual transition from active cultivation to landscape abandon and heather dominance. Permanent settlement has been identified between 800 and 500 before Christian era at Eikebakken, with the construction of structures such as House 1 and House 4 in the lower terraces. These buildings resemble contemporary ones in Årstad and Lonaheia. Årstad site was dug in 1987. It was found 3 buildings about 50 meters apart from each other within cairn fields. Sadly, not all the cairns were excavated. It was considered to be agrarian landscape where these buildings were. When we look at the buildings from this period, we can see that all of them are oriented the same way. All of them are quite similar. All of them are giving you more or less the same data. And most likely, and normally that orientation responds to the prevalent winds, especially the heavy winds in the winter sort of thing, which is when you get the big storms. You want to put the shorter end of the house facing the bad weather. Additionally, houses 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 6 in Eikebakken were later covered by cairns, a phenomenon which we also observe in Årstad, as you can see. And also in Lonaheia, you could argue. I mean, we're digging in cultivated land or under Tirkamark, and we're finding what it looks like a completely removed Royce, but we are not 100% sure. Sort of thing is pretty damaged. Suggesting a strong spatial and symbolic link between domestic and possibly funerary structures. Most of these buildings date to the late Bronze Age and pre-Roman Iron Age, except House 2, that we will see later on. The burial field. The burial field was in use from the end of the late Bronze Age through pre-Roman Iron Age, with the most intense activity around 600 to 300 before Christ. Many structures were placed over agricultural land, and as cereal farming declined and heathland took over, the cemetery continued to expand over this fossilized land, signaling its lasting ritual significance. Royce 2, likely one of the earliest and most prominent monuments, which is the one on top that has like this boundary marker here. It emphasizes by its isolated position and surrounding stone enclosure. Royce 1, which is securely dated to pre-Roman Iron Age, we dated the bone layer that we had there, is structurally similar, suggesting close chronological placement between both monuments. The cemetery probably reflects social and chronological layering, as we have seen. Most of the structures lack grave goods or human remains, but still show deliberate construction. Artifacts like cairn stones and slag hint at cremation rituals and symbolic acts beyond simple ritual, in line with the Scandinavian cultic traditions of the period, where burial grounds also served as sacred places and ongoing interaction with the dead. Although artifact evidence for the later period of pre-Roman Iron Age is limited, radiocarbon dating indicate that the burial field continued to be used into late pre-Roman Iron Age. A dated foot crush from a ceramic in one of the Roycer, and a handle and handles that we're finding in two cairns that indicates most likely a ceramic that it's a bit later. It's not only the situla format boring thing. Suggest a later phase of activity. Both the structures show signs of secondary use, as do several other cairns, pointing to prolonged ritual engagement in the area. Additionally, two nearby cooking pits, dated to the early Roman period, hint at continued activity in the area. The house dated to Roman Iron Age was deliberately placed in the landscape with a landscape-oriented layout with two entrances facing the inmark of Engelsvoll, which is this one's here, and another more central entrance facing the swamp, the bog area. We have to consider that even though we do have indications of serial processing or storage within this house, the palynological evidence shows that there's no farming going on. The entire area is heathland. And the house is being placed in the middle of a well-established grave field already. The house is also overlapped by a structure. The structure is 71, which is completely different than all the other ones. Interesting. This structure had like a row of larger stones in one side, and you can see that the other row of larger stones had been robbed. Maybe they are the stones that are here, I don't know. And you do have a cluster of stones around here. When you check like how do both of them overlapped, they overlap like this. This corridor-like stone setting points directly towards the entrance of the house and is later than the house. So we know like that at least this monument is later than the overall cemetery, but it's placed within like the main axis of the cemetery sort of thing. I do think like this is a kind of a solid evidence for a cult building within a grave field sort of thing. But again, we dug it on the last week, doing it quick sort of thing, so we only managed to cut all the roof-bearing posts, the fireplaces, and managed to get like, I guess like 6 macrofossil samples, just in case, which is what we have analyzed, sort of thing. We have dated 2 datings, one from the fireplace, another one from the roof-bearing post here, and another cooking pit underneath the mount. All of them are between 100 and 380. So there is no doubt, and it's also a completely different building. So when we look in a visual range, which is the blue area that you have here, is what is visible from the top of the most prominent mount. We can see that within a range of 800 meters, which is more or less the range you will have in order to identify a person, see which kind of clothes that person is having and whether it's moving the arms or not, sort of thing. And like if you get a bit closer, you will be able to hear it, sort of thing. You can see like that the gray field is completely dominant. It dominates everything around, sort of thing. Also, the swamp area. And entirely the esker system, which is what I have marked in yellow. The building would have been right there, right between these two areas. If we go farther up, to 2 kilometers range, we can see like that the visual dominance reaches all the areas where we do have houses from the same period. Or we infer settlement remains that maybe they haven't been dated, but could be from the same period, sort of thing. So this site has a position in which all the farmers around will be able to see and most likely participate on what's going on here. We also have like Tegle Mirfun in this area here. For instance, this standing loom, all the threads from a loom from Roman Iron Age or Migration period, deposited in a mir, and this wooden vessel also deposited in a mir within like this area here. So we do have indications in at least Roman Iron Age and Migration period of a significance of the swamp areas within the Freulands Vatnet area. When we rise the view shed and analyze the location of the site within Freulands Vatnet, we can see that from the location of the site, you have full control of the entire lake. So the lake is important. Also, like the view area that it's the farthermost view area from the site is the end of the lake. I mean, it extends far beyond than the 5 kilometers. So we do have a clear indication that the lake and the location, it's important within this location. We also can see that among the larger monuments that we have in the area, we have like some monuments here, every one like above 20 meters in diameter. We don't know which period they are from. We do have some ones here. We also don't know which period they are from. I don't think it's so important. The one in Lonaheya, maybe, it was 30 meters in diameter. It was the Neolithic location in Lonaheya. But you also have like that towards the southwest area, you are catching the major monuments in the Hauanda and Tu Ridge. And those ones, you know that they are Bronze Age, early Bronze Age. You also have to consider that towards the southwest is where you're going to get like the sunset. So all these former large monuments are going to be within the sunset across the year. And that highlights the importance of Eikebakken as a ritual place. One of these monuments is a Steinhaug in Sarheim, which would have cut itself to the skyline, sort of thing. The ones you have like on towards the edges of the view shed will be visible from this side against the skyline, against the blue sky, sort of thing. One of them is a Steinhaug in Sarheim, which was excavated in 1968, at least half of it, sort of thing. During the excavation, they found like that most likely it was a Bronze Age monument. I mean, like you can see like that they also highlight the problems about like no bone preservation. Here they are trying to take like infrared photography in order to see whether they can trace the bones or not, sort of thing, which to do this in 1969, tip-top. And they only managed to date some Kuhlgropper charcoal pits here, which you can see that are way inside the monument, sort of thing, at least within the latest phase. And they were quite disappointed when they got like pre-Roman Iron Age dating for them. Of course, once you have sites like Eikebakken, maybe that disappointment towards the pre-Roman Iron Age activity around these monuments should be. We also have to consider that this is a site that deserves a monography. I mean, like it has Helle Risninger here, foot solar there, pose holes around the large boulder sort of thing, and many faces. It has at least like 13 different depositions of bone within like the mount itself. Implications for other grave fields, and this is the last slide, I promise. Here is Ritland in Suldal. The site is close to a rinformed tunnel leg, most likely is from Roman Iron Age onwards. You can see like that the graves are pretty regular, quite flat, with a kind of promontory on top, like spay leg grave mounds, sort of thing. They usually, like these grave mounds are quite common, like when you're looking Lidar to rinformed tunnel leg, and in Norway you usually have one of this close by. Sort of things. So normally, like the dating of rinformed tunnel leg and these mounds could be like more or less similar. When you highlight like the microtopography in Lidar, you can see patterns here. I mean, like the mounds are on top of a terraced landscape. I mean, if I were not in Norway, I would characterize this almost like Celtic fields. Sort of thing. I mean, like you do have like rectangular farmland, and you do have like the mounds being placed on top of it, which, for instance, the Eikebakken evidence also shows how a grave mount or a grave field develops on top of ancient fossilized landscape, sort of thing. Also, if you look at the bottom of that area towards the edge of the terrace overlooking the rinformed tunnel leg, I see a mount and I see a rectangular structure covered by that mount. I mean, I wish I could dig there, sort of thing. I have a feeling there that I do have like a kind of a similar situation like in Eikebakken, where I do have a building covered by a mount within a grave field context, sort of thing. I don't know. I'm just looking at Lidar. Here you have like most of the archaeologists involved in the project. You can see a lot of them were foreigners. That's why I wanted to have like this presentation in English, so I can send them the YouTube link, sort of thing. And like the report is now being read and proofread by one of my colleagues. Hopefully it will be available on the net within like the next few weeks. It depends on how much it will take like to publish it on the net. Hopefully you read it. We have worked hard for it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Theo.
Sorry it extended too much. It was difficult to make it.
Perfect time management.
Okay.
Almost exactly 60 minutes.
Okay.
So that was fine. Yeah, thank you for that. Some brilliant maps, so something for the geographically inclined to feast on. Very satisfying. I have some questions initially, and then probably open up for the floor.
Yeah. Bit of wood.
As a cairn field or site in terms of excavation work, what do you consider the main lessons that you've learned here that you can impart on us other archaeologists for future work with similar sites?
I think like the biggest failure we did here was not having like a data management plan. We produced a lot of data, a lot of photogrammetry that we were not able to digest. Sort of thing. We were thinking that, okay, we are digging here, grabbing everything we can, we will reconstruct it later on. This was too large to reconstruct it later on. And like the delay on delivering the final report shows it, sort of thing. I mean, like, you believe, especially like when you are not understanding what you're doing, you believe that by taking more photos, you're going to be able to address that questions you are not understanding. And in this case, it didn't really work so well. Sort of thing. So that's one of the things I would suggest. Another thing is like treat everything as part of a broader landscape. I mean, when we open large areas, when we get a better understanding, we manage to answer questions that if we had just focused on the cairns, as it was the initial budget, we would not have been able to understand it. Sort of thing. I mean, like, grey fields traditionally in Norway haven't required like this enormous soil moving sort of thing, but we don't have many cult houses, maybe because of that. Yeah.
So building slightly on that, and assume, was there, or what was the extent of later disturbance on this site through agriculture or something else?
It hasn't been like any kind of agriculture on the area. It had been like German activity related to the upper mounds, sort of thing. Most likely they set up a cannon in one of them. You could see like the feet of the cannon, sort of thing. I mean, like, they haven't built up a bunker, luckily, sort of thing, but like, I mean, you have a train line beside, and obviously like they prepared for, in case they needed to bring up the cannon, they had it prepared like to bring it up and put it on top of the mount. We do have indications of possible plundering related to the larger ones, sort of thing, in the sense about like kind of gropper on the surface, but we don't have any indications that like the area had been like extensively farmed. Obviously, if somebody has went with a spade like 100 years ago and cultivated some like a small patch of land, like, there is no remains of that sort of thing, but it hasn't been affecting the structures. We do believe that many of the curbstones of the mounds had been removed, and most likely has to do with the fence that divides between Engelsvoll and Øvre Øksnevad farm. You do need to build up a proper fence, and you are always obviously going to grab the larger stones wherever you have them available. And I think like that, if the site like 150 years ago like would have looked a bit better, sort of thing.
All right, do we have any other questions from Finn?
All right, first of all, thank you for the talk. I think it was very interesting. I also want to apologize for my forebearers setting up a cannon on your cairn, which is a bit, yeah, I'm sorry. But so I don't work on archaeology in Norway, and I've in the past excavated cairns in the Near East, and we used luminescence dating on the cairns that didn't give any kind of charcoal remains or any kind of finds to kind of roughly date them in any kind of sense. And I just wanted to hear your opinion whether you are doing these things also, or why you wouldn't do these things here in Norway, because I obviously just don't know. So
I wish I had knew a bit better when I was working on this, as later on I have understood from other kind of conversations. Because normally in Norway the use of luminescence, traditionally within like field archaeologists, we have considered that the presence of coarse material like large stones affects the reliability of the method. 2 months ago, I was talking with an archaeologist that said that it had nothing to do, sort of thing, that it's not like a kind of a method that will only be used on sand soils or like stone-free soils, sort of thing. So I mean, like, we obviously need to use other kind of methods than the ones we had. Like in Øksnevad, we had a problem. Like the initial budget didn't consider the use of machine in the degree that we use it at the end. We got like the Riksantikvar to allow us to move money from one post to another. But obviously, in order to get hours for machine, we had to take hours from other posts. So like the possibility of doing more dating than 50 samples and more pollen analysis than 3 agricultural profiles was beyond the scope of the project, sort of thing. Obviously, in the future, we do need to be updated about like methods regarding this, because we do have a problem dating these structures, I have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh, one over here.
One question. When it comes to thermoluminescence, what was the context that you dated?
So we were excavating nomadic burial mounds in the eastern Jordan Desert. So they were 2nd, 3rd century, but roughly we didn't have any context to it, basically. And what we did was we were obviously excavating the cairns, and then we thought to date the lowest definable ring of set stones, so stones set by human agency, and then removed them and dated the soil underneath in order to figure out what was the date that they began construction on this, or the first ring was laid out in a way, because that was the only possible way for us to date these sites, because there was no charcoal and very, very limited and undefining material evidence that could have been from like a date range of like approximately 600 years or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course we had Simon Armitage here a few months back, who also had a nice presentation on luminescence dating, for those who would be interested in seeing that. That's up on our YouTube channel. Okay, thanks again, Theo.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
And this was this semester's final archaeological research seminar, and we will get back to you as soon as possible, I promise, with a program for next semester. It's going to be a good one, so you can look forward to that. And to those of you who want to go to Ad Fontes for a beer, officially opens at 4, but you can still sit there now. You're welcome to join us there. So thank you.